Hey there people, how you doing? So, today we have the camera comparison between the Vivo X60 Pro Plus. It's a long name, but it's definitely Vivo's best flagship at the moment with Zeiss camera partnership. And yeah, it's about the only way it is similar to the OnePlus 9 Pro, also a flagship, and it also has the Hasselblad partnership. Now, other than this partnership with big camera brands, the approaches to how their cameras perform overall, it's slightly different on both of these. And so let's find out which of these will come out on top in this camera comparison. This is only photography, videos are gonna come out soon. So here's our first set of images, broad daylight as you'd expect. And well, there are certain obvious differences, the first one being the colors. Well, the OnePlus feels a little desaturated, I would say. The Vivo is doing the best job in representing the colors that I saw at that moment. It does go slightly crazy with the sky color, but that's about the only complaint I have with regards to the Vivo's colors. Everything else is very similar, details, HDR even, very nice on both. Now how about the ultra-wide camera as well? This is actually not a very difficult shot, there's a lot of light. The OnePlus has some very beautiful colors on the ultra-wide camera, unlike its main camera, which is kind of surprising, but that's just how it is. The Vivo is not far off. I would say, in this case at least, it looks a little bit more natural, like the warmth in the leaves and everything, it looks a little bit more realistic. The OnePlus isn't bad either, so yeah, all in all, I want to call this one a tie with just a difference in colors here, because details and everything is just so very similar on both. So it was very close up until now, but the HDR, man, just look at all of those shadows there. The OnePlus 9 Pro is not doing a bad job, but the Vivo is definitely pulling ahead here. There's so much more color and just it looks amazing on the X60 Pro Plus. Now as for zoom, well, it's an interesting situation on both of these. The OnePlus does have 3x optical zoom while we have a 2x here on the X60. Now both are very good as you'd expect. I do like the OnePlus here. I think it has a little bit more shadow detail and it overall looks very nice. Colors, however, do look a little bit more natural on the X60, like the white balance is particularly what makes it look so nice on the X60 here. But we do have a 5x optical zoom on the X60, which is quite nice to have. Now I do want to say this isn't the highest quality sensor for a periscope zoom, and you'll see soon enough why I say that, but you know, optical zoom is still optical zoom. It still produces a much better image than anything you could get at 5x on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now here's a 10x zoom on both. You can see having optical zoom really helps out here. It's not the best 10x zoom image we've seen, and that's exactly why I feel like Vivo should at least upgrade this periscope zoom sensor. But nonetheless, it's still doing a better job than the OnePlus ever could. The 10x zoom is definitely usable on the X60 Pro Plus, not so much on the OnePlus. Now how about high resolution? Well, this is where, you know, things kind of take a twist, let's say. Overall, I like both of them. The X60 is definitely brighter, but that does have some downsides. The OnePlus, on the other hand, is actually producing a very nice balanced image. Now how about details? Yeah, I think the OnePlus is slightly sharper, like ever so slightly, and as I said, having higher brightness does have its downsides. You can see some parts of the building are blown out on the X60. So yeah, all in all, I do like the details on the OnePlus here. Now the X60 does have a 100 megapixel mode for some reason. The sensor, far as I've known, it's 50 megapixels, so I'm not sure what exactly is going on because clearly it's not doing a particularly better job. I would say it's a smidge sharper maybe, but I still think the OnePlus is doing a better job here, so yeah, overall I'm not exactly sure why we even have a 100 megapixel mode. As for the ultra-wide cameras with their respective high-res modes, well here I think the OnePlus is doing a slightly better job with colors and dynamic range. You can see the building in the background is slightly blown out and the colors on the leaves and everything looks way better on the OnePlus in my opinion. Zooming in, well, both are doing a fairly similar and very good job. Like this is a huge crop for an ultra-wide camera. And there's still a lot of detail, but I do like the X60. It has a little bit more organic detail while there's a bit of processing and over-sharpening going on the OnePlus 9 Pro here. So other than the slight detail differences, I think the OnePlus is doing an overall better job. Now here's another zoomed in shot, but the 2x zoom on the X60 can produce 32 megapixel images compared to I believe just 8 megapixels on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now that isn't bad, but having 32 megapixels even at 2x can actually give a fair advantage, especially if you have a nice amount of even lighting going on. You can see if we were to crop in on both and match the amount of crop, well, the detail levels on both the OnePlus and the X60 are very similar. If anything, I think the X60 is doing a slightly better job because of higher contrast. It produces a slightly sharper image. And so having that 32 megapixel mode with 2x zoom does help out a lot. Oh, and did I mention that the colors on the X60 are miles ahead of the OnePlus? It's not bad on the OnePlus, but man, the X60 is so good with giving us vibrant yet insanely natural looking colors. Alright, now for the hardest situation in our camera comparison, the OnePlus, it produces weird images like these, and it's very inconsistent, especially in this backlit situation. But the X60, as you can see, is producing a fantastic image. You can also get underexposed ones, but if you use tap to expose, the problem can be solved. And all in all, I think the OnePlus is technically doing a good job in terms of dynamic range. It is slightly like overexposing the shadows in my opinion. It looks a bit flat, and the colors, I think that's what's bothering me more than anything. It looks very unnatural, especially like Valentine's feathers and everything. I'm not a fan of that. Yeah, the X60 doesn't have as much detail in the shadows, but it's still, in my opinion, doing a much better job in terms of balancing it out. And also, there's very little haloing and overprocessing present compared to the OnePlus 9 Pro. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the X60 here. Now, the ultrawide cameras with a similar situation. I'd initially thought that the difference was very clear. A slightly underexposed image on the X60 to preserve highlights, and the opposite, to give us more shadow detail on the OnePlus. But that's not the entire story. Upon zooming in, I found out that, man, the detail difference is stunning. The OnePlus is completely smudged out. I think it's trying to reduce grain or noise or something of that sort. The X60 on the other hand, it is so much better. And this is not even the high res mode, this is the normal 12 megapixel images from both of them, and the X60 is definitely pulling ahead. Now macro, well, both of these have fantastic macro modes if you ask me. Now I do think the X60 can get slightly closer. I mean, it's, to be honest, a negligible difference. And that's about the only difference here. Both are producing amazing shots, as you can see. Now portraits and human subjects, well, this is always an interesting situation. There are two sides to these images. Firstly, the X60 is doing a much better job with the dynamic range, but skin tones, it could do better on the X60. Well, the OnePlus is looking a bit too yellow in my opinion, but the X60, it's looking a little desaturated, like a little bit more punch in there would have produced an image that I would have liked a lot. But that's not really the case here. But well, even so, I would still go with the X60. I think it's doing a good job here, but I do think it needs a little bit more saturation. As for this image, this is a zoomed in shot here, and well, I gotta say, the X60 looks tremendously detailed. Like, it's impressive how much details can be preserved here, and there's a very good reason for that. The OnePlus looks fairly soft compared to the X60, quite simply because the OnePlus doesn't have optical zoom. It just digitally zooms in, and that's about the only option you have on the OnePlus, even though it has a 3x optical zoom lens. So I'm not sure why we can't use it, but nonetheless, I'm gonna go with the X60 here. It does have much better, more accurate skin tones. The details, as I said, just absolutely bonkers how good it looks. Low light, however, well, this is a very tricky lighting situation, much more than low light, and man, the OnePlus is tremendous here. I don't know how it managed to pull off such a beautiful photograph, but it's definitely doing better than the X60, even though the X60 did use night mode portrait here, which is what surprises me more than anything else. Like, I'd expected so much better from the X60, but that doesn't seem to be the case, at least in this lighting condition. Because just out of curiosity, when I took another night mode shot here, night mode portrait shot that is, well, here the X60 is doing a better job. Don't mind the magenta hue, that was because of this one weird light in the background, but nonetheless, here the X60 is clearly a winner. So yeah, I don't know what happened in the previous image. Selfies, well, we have a very similar story to what happened with the rear cameras. The X60 does look a smidge desaturated, not as much as the rear camera portrait, but yeah, the OnePlus is completely screwing it up here. It's produced the same image upon taking multiple shots, so I'm not sure why it's doing this. Anyways, you can see all that grain and artifact in the background. I don't know how much YouTube compression will allow, but trust me, there's a boatload. And not to mention the blown out highlights on my face. Yeah, it's not looking very nice on the OnePlus here, so easy win for the X60. a portrait selfie here, well, I think now the OnePlus is actually doing a better job. It does have a fair amount of saturation, skin tones are looking particularly nice. Now, both have blown out some highlights on my face, but yeah, the OnePlus is definitely doing a better job. It does have so much better colors overall, and the higher contrast is also looking very nice here. The X60 in my opinion looks just a tad bit washed out. Now we do have night mode selfie on the X60 versus not having anything as such on the OnePlus. It's sad really, because if we had that feature, I'm pretty sure it could have done a very good job on the OnePlus. The X60, however, even though it has a night mode selfie, it is way too smooth. It really does maybe some noise reduction or smoothing out, but it really doesn't look good. Now, to be honest, if I had to pick one, I'd go with the X60. It does produce a brighter, better image overall, and cleaner image not to mention. But yeah, I do hope that Vivo can improve the night mode selfie here. Rear camera night modes, however, have a slightly different story. As you can see, this isn't a particularly low light situation. We'll get to those in a moment, but overall, I do like how the X60 looks. It has slightly higher contrast, that really looks nice. And the colors also look a tad bit more natural. It's not a huge difference, but nonetheless, I do like the X60 here. Now there is a styles option with night mode on the X60, and this is the blue ice filter that you can get, and it's probably one of my favorite features in a smartphone camera so far. There's also a black and orange filter that does the exact opposite of the blue ice that you saw previously. And here's one of my personal favorites. There's a teal and orange one, and it looks good. Like, it looks really good. It is obviously very stylized, and that's the entire point of having this feature here. Not for everybody, but for someone like me, this is just a miracle of a feature. And here's my new favorite. This is called the dark red, and as you can see, it looks incredible. Like, yeah, obviously not natural, this is not how the situation was, but man, I really like having this kind of crazy options here. Anyways, let's move on to a much crazier lighting situation. The ring light in the background is at its warmest setting. You can see just how much warmth is present on the X60's table. Well, that is exactly how it was. I really like how well the X60 can represent the warmth in this case at least. The OnePlus isn't bad, it does have higher contrast, it tries to balance out the warmth, and it does give us a little bit more vibrance, especially in the leaves. So yeah, overall both are doing a pretty good job. Even the detail levels are phenomenal on both. On the ultra-wide shot, however, well, things aren't as similar. The lighting is basically the same. We still have that warm light that's filling it up, and I do think the X60 is once again giving a more accurate representation of that light, but I think it's the details that are just giving the win to the X60, because as you can see, this is an insane difference. Like, man, look at how much of those textures are visible on the X60 versus the OnePlus, and there's a very simple reason to that. The OnePlus just doesn't take long enough exposures, and with the ultra-wide camera, it needs to take longer exposures, otherwise it's just gonna give us smudged up images like these. Now let us move on to quite possibly the lowest light that I've ever used any cameras in. I personally couldn't see anything that was going on here. And yeah, clearly the OnePlus isn't doing a particularly good job here. The details, the amount of green it has, it's really not particularly nice. The X60 isn't perfect, but it is definitely doing a better job. There's a very simple reason once again to that, because upon zooming in, you can see just how much of a difference is present here. And that's simply because the X60 took about a 5 to 6 second exposure, versus the OnePlus just took about like 2, if I'm not wrong. So that difference can really show, especially in like harsher lower light conditions like these. It really widens the gap here. So that's a wrap for this camera comparison, and there's a good reason I didn't show any outdoors night mode shots. It's because it was so similar, I didn't really want to waste your time. It's going to be the exact same result, and it's only in the much lower lighting conditions that we could see the major differences, as you saw right there. But nonetheless, let's break down exactly how different these cameras are. So the X60 Pro Plus, in my opinion, with the main cameras, it does have slightly better, more natural colors, at least I like it a lot. And secondly, it does have much more versatility, because this camera here, it has 2x and 5x optical zooms, so that inherently gives it a lead in versatility, as you'd expect. The 5x zoom, I would hope that Vivo with their next iterations would upgrade a little, because the sensor in particular needs to be slightly better. Other than that, amazing cameras for daylight. Now for HDR, well, I do think the dynamic range can, at quite a few times, be better on the X60 Pro Plus. The OnePlus isn't bad, but clearly the X60 does take a lot more wins when it comes to dynamic range. In numerous cases, we saw that the X60 produces better images. Especially with the highlight control, the X60 is particularly good for that. So, next up for portraits, well, this is where things get kinda interesting because I do like the X60 overall better. It does have 2x optical zoom with portraits, so that's a huge win in my opinion for many people. But I do think that if we had a little bit more saturation and vibrance, especially in like the skin tones, it could do a slightly better job. It's a minor problem, to be honest. The OnePlus actually has a lot more work to do in my opinion. It does need to improve on dynamic range and everything as well. So yeah, overall the X60 is better with portraits. Night mode, as I said before, easily better on the X60 Pro Plus, quite simply because it takes a much longer exposure. That's also because it has a gimbal stabilization system. It's quite a simple reason as to why it can take 7 seconds of exposure without you ever having to worry about, shakes or jerks, because they never make it into the photograph. It's just amazing. The gimbal stabilization here, it really helps with night mode. On videos, it can help, so we will have the camera comparison out soon enough with videos, with all of the other flagships that we have here. So we'll know if the stabilization does help out or not. But overall, in photography, yeah, I think the X60 is gonna take a win here, at least in my books. If I had to pick one, I would go with the X60. Now there are definitely areas where the OnePlus pulls ahead in certain high-res images, and with the ultrawide camera, I believe the colors are better on the OnePlus 9 Pro, but overall, I think the X60 takes a win. It deserves one. So, with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because those camera comparisons, there's a lot more to come, and you do not want to miss them out. So, I'll be seeing you guys later. Cheers.